Kurt Cobain was born on February 20, 1967, in the small logging town of Aberdeen, Washington. His early life was marked by the influence of the rugged landscape and a family that was both supportive and tumultuous. His parents, Wendy and Don Cobain, were working-class people who struggled to keep their marriage afloat. When they divorced when Kurt was 9, the emotional fallout would leave scars that shaped his worldview and music for the rest of his life. The divorce tore Kurt apart. He was an artistic and sensitive child, who found solace in drawing, music, and the world of imagination. But as his family fractured, Kurt became increasingly isolated and bitter. He bounced between homes, living with his mother, father, and various relatives, never quite feeling like he belonged. This instability fueled his feelings of rejection and fueled his budding anger at a society he perceived as hypocritical. By his early teens, Kurt had already developed a deep passion for music. The first instrument he mastered was the drums, but soon after he picked up a guitar and discovered his love for songwriting. Kurt was drawn to the raw, emotional power of punk rock, particularly bands like the Sex Pistols, the Melvins, and Black Flag. He admired how they rejected the polished and commercialized music of the mainstream, embracing chaos, rebellion, and a do-it-yourself ethos. Cobain found an escape in music, but he still struggled with depression, feelings of inadequacy, and chronic pain. Aberdeen was a bleak place for a kid like Kurt, and he longed to escape the small-town mindset that felt stifling and oppressive. He was labeled an outsider, a misfit, and his sense of alienation deepened as he grew older. School wasn't much better, and Kurt eventually dropped out, further isolating himself from his peers. In the mid-1980s, Cobain met Chris Novoselic, another misfit who shared Kurt's love of punk rock. Together, they started playing music, forming the foundation of what would eventually become Nirvana. With Kurt on guitar and vocals, Chris on bass, and a rotating lineup of drummers, Nirvana began to build a small following in the underground Seattle music scene. But it wasn't until they recruited Dave Grohl as their drummer in 1990 that Nirvana's lineup solidified, and their sound took on the tight, ferocious energy that would define them. In 1989, Nirvana released their debut album, Bleach, on the independent label Sub Pop. The album was raw, loud, and aggressive, everything that Cobain admired about punk. But it was their follow-up album, Nevermind, released in 1991, that would catapult them to worldwide fame and forever change the face of popular music. Nevermind was a revelation. Fueled by Kurt's explosive songwriting, the album blended the heavy, distorted guitars of punk and grunge with catchy melodies and lyrics that spoke to the disillusionment of a generation. The lead single, Smells Like Teen Spirit, became an anthem of the early 90s, and Nirvana suddenly found themselves at the center of a cultural phenomenon. Kurt Cobain, the reluctant frontman, was thrust into the spotlight. Almost overnight, he became the voice of a generation, though it was a role he never wanted and often resented. Cobain was uncomfortable with the trappings of fame, and the pressure to constantly be on for the media and the fans began to weigh heavily on him. He saw himself as an artist, not a rock star, and the mainstream success of Nirvana felt like a betrayal of the underground scene from which they had come. As Nirvana's popularity grew, so did Kurt's struggles with his mental health and drug addiction. Cobain had been using heroin for several years as a way to numb both his physical and emotional pain. The chronic stomach problems that plagued him since childhood had worsened over the years, and heroin became a form of self-medication. But as his addiction deepened, so did his sense of despair. Despite his personal struggles, Cobain continued to make music. In 1993, Nirvana released their third studio album, In Utero. The album was a stark departure from the polished sound of Nevermind. Produced by Steve Albini, it was rawer, darker, and more abrasive, a reflection of Kurt's growing discontent with fame and his increasing desire to push back against the commercial expectations placed on him. Songs like Heart-Shaped Box and All Apologies showcased Cobain's ability to blend beautiful melodies with haunting, often cryptic lyrics. However, by this time, Cobain was spiraling further into depression and addiction. His marriage to Courtney Love, the controversial frontwoman of the band Hole, was often the subject of media scrutiny. The couple had a daughter, Frances Bean, in 1992, but their relationship was rocky, marred by drug use and constant tabloid attention. The pressures of fame, combined with Kurt's own personal demons, pushed him to the brink. By 1994, Cobain's heroin addiction had worsened, and he had already survived several near-fatal overdoses. In March of that year, after a particularly traumatic incident in Rome where he overdosed on a combination of champagne and Rohypnol, Kurt agreed to go to rehab. But just days after entering a facility in Los Angeles, he escaped and returned to Seattle. On April 5, 1994, Kurt Cobain took his own life in his Seattle home. He was just 27 years old, joining the infamous 27 Club of musicians who died at the same age, including Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, and Jim Morrison. His body was discovered 3 days later by an electrician who had come to install a security system. Cobain's death sent shockwaves through the music world and left millions of fans grieving. It was the tragic end to a life that had been filled with brilliance, pain, and contradictions. In his suicide note, Kurt referenced his love for music but also his exhaustion and inability to cope with the pressures that fame brought. In the years since his death, Kurt Cobain has become a cultural icon, a symbol of the angst and disillusionment of Generation X. His influence can be heard in the music of countless bands that followed in Nirvana's footsteps, and his legacy as a songwriter and artist continues to resonate. Cobain's music was marked by a raw honesty that connected with people on a deep emotional level, and his lyrics often reflected the inner turmoil that he struggled with throughout his life. But beyond the mythology and the legacy, Kurt Cobain was a deeply human figure. He was a man who never wanted to be a hero or a spokesman, but who found himself in that role nonetheless. He was an artist who grappled with the pain of his past, the contradictions of his present, and the fear of what the future might hold. His life was marked by beauty and tragedy, and his music remains a powerful reminder of both. Ultimately, Kurt Cobain's story is one of a man who was caught between two worlds, between the underground and the mainstream, between fame and anonymity, between life and death. He was a reluctant icon, a figure whose brilliance was matched only by his fragility. And though he is gone, his music lives on, a testament to his talent, his pain, and his enduring influence on the world. After Cobain's death, the cultural impact of Nirvana and Kurt's music continued to grow, transcending the boundaries of grunge and shaping alternative rock for decades to come. For many fans, Nirvana's music symbolized a raw, unfiltered honesty that resonated with the angst and dissatisfaction of the time, yet Cobain's message continues to find relevance among younger generations. Frances Bean Cobain, Kurt's daughter, has largely kept her life private, though she occasionally engages with her father's legacy. She has expressed love for the man he was, even if her memories of him come largely from stories and his music rather than personal experiences. His widow, Courtney Love, remains a controversial figure but has also spoken about Kurt with a mixture of love, anger, and sorrow, reflecting the complexity of their relationship. The city of Aberdeen, once a place Kurt longed to escape, now celebrates its most famous son with a sign that reads, "Welcome to Aberdeen, come as you are," a nod to one of Nirvana's most iconic songs. Over the years, fans have made pilgrimages to Kurt's hometown, paying tribute to the man who turned his pain into art that spoke to millions. Cobain's legacy as an artist and cultural figure continues to evolve, as new generations discover his music and are drawn to the raw emotion and vulnerability he conveyed. While Cobain may have resisted the role of a generational spokesman during his life, his voice remains one of the most powerful and enduring in modern music.